Whatever happens to Turkey, it is always said that foreign powers are behind it. Could the same powers be behind military coups, organizations like the PKK and FETO, and even the so-called deep state?
What they call the deep state is not part of our state institutions.
Firstly, it cannot be said that I had a very close relationship with him.
You mentioned guerrillas, counter-guerrillas. What have you done in this country? Nothing. We have now stuck our nose into it.
When he came to the meeting, while going down in the elevator, already then, he said to the friend beside him, "We need to get rid of these people first."
To answer this question, I had to look at historical records and documents. Eventually, we found out why we have not been independent for years. And this concerned our future as well.
"Why do you want this money?" I asked. "For the Special Warfare Department," he said. I said, "I've never heard of such an institution," and I had not. They said, "Until now the Americans covered the expenses. This year they cut it." I asked, "Well, where is this institution located?" "In a wing of the American Military Aid Building." "Well, what does this institution do?" I asked. "Sir," they said, "this institution assigns some patriots for life to start an underground activity in case some regions of Turkey are invaded." They said, "And this organization has some secret weapon caches."
What do you call power? I am someone who planned at 20 years old to overthrow it and install someone else instead. What's even a government, you fool?
While the Prime Minister of the time accidentally learns of a secret organization working for the Americans within the state, Fethullah Gulen admits years earlier that he planned to take over the state. So, the story goes back even further. The Special Warfare Department, also known as Gladio, which Prime Minister Ecevit accidentally learned about, was a secret organization established by the US to prevent a possible Soviet invasion. After World War II, the Cold War began between the US and the Soviets, and the world was divided into capitalist and communist blocs. The US, under the pretext of the communist threat, created and supported these secret organizations in NATO countries. While the world was divided into capitalist and communist camps, Turkey was also divided into right and left. Streets witnessed clashes between right-wing and left-wing youths. Every day there was a bombing, assassination, or unsolved murder. The Gladio organization provoked nationalist and communist youths who loved their country as they saw fit against each other. Prime Minister Bülent Ecevit assigned a prosecutor to expose this organization, but he encountered invisible obstacles.
Meanwhile, as we tried to pursue all these events, we faced some serious obstacles. Some of these obstacles were invisible. For example, obstacles even the Chief of General Staff could not see. It was clear there was an organized structure.
The prosecutor assigned by Ecevit, Doğan Öz, wrote in his report that the US and multinational corporations used Gladio. And 2 months after writing this report, he was killed by the organization he mentioned in the report.
He said this was a secret organization. I told him this is not a secret organization. This is the Special Warfare Department. This has a commander at its head. It is directly subordinate to the Chief of General Staff. We heard that it was used in terrorist incidents, although this organization's duty is not that. The intelligence that I obtained, indicates that they were at the core of this matter.
In other words, the US placed an organization inside the state and the army to create chaos in and keep Turkey under control. Gladio was both fueling street incidents and carrying out unsolved murders in the southeast. As the year 1980 began in a state of anarchy, the task of restoring order once again fell to America's children in Ankara.
I can remember the man who called me from the duty desk in the National Security Council said something to the effect of, "The boys in Ankara did it," meaning that the generals had moved.
Kenan Evren said in the coup declaration that the military administration would remain loyal to NATO. After the coup, Kenan Evren sent a letter to US President Carter expressing gratitude for the US turning a blind eye to the coup. Turkey was receiving not only military aid but also military training from the US. For example, 16 Turkish officers were sent to the US in 1948 for special warfare training. One of these officers, Danish Karabelen, was tasked in 1952 with establishing the Mobilization Investigation Board, the precursor to the Special Warfare Department. 14 out of the 16 officers carried out the May 27, 1960 coup. According to American documents, the CIA had started anticipating the coup days in advance. The soldiers we sent to the US for training introduced Türkiye to military coups. 3 years after the coup, when Turkish Cypriots began to be massacred by Greeks, Türkiye wanted to intervene. However, US President Johnson sent a letter to Prime Minister İnönü prohibiting the use of weapons supplied to Türkiye, because in the 1947 agreement, the US had added the condition that the weapons supplied could only be used as they wished. Thus, Prime Minister İnönü became a victim of the agreement he himself had signed. While Türkiye thought it had joined NATO, in reality, the US had deeply penetrated Türkiye. So much so that the then head of the National Intelligence Organization, Fuat Doğu, came to receive instructions from the CIA.
He told me this. He said, I was not the head of the National Intelligence Organization. Oh, no, sir, you were. I said, you are a general, you served as an ambassador, and you were head of the National Intelligence Organization. No. He said, I was the CIA branch manager.
After the 1980 coup, the right-left conflict gave way to the PKK terrorism. The atrocities Gladio committed in the southeast led to the emergence and strengthening of the PKK. The path of Abdullah Öcalan, founder of the PKK, even crossed with Gladio.
My first membership was with the Idealist Hearts.
No way. What were you doing there?
I attended the seminars of the Anti-Communism Association. Refik Korkut, was the first head of the ACA. I went to both the Idealist Hearts and the Anti-Communism Association seminars.
Then you became the #1 communist, right?
Now nobody knows about that. There was even a membership card.
Another person who was a member of the Anti-Communism Association was Fethullah Gülen. Fethullah Gülen was among the founders of the Anti-Communism Association in Erzurum in the 1960s. The US used the fear of communism during the Cold War to keep countries under control. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the communist threat also disappeared. The US needed a new enemy to restore order in the world. RAND, the US's most influential think tank, published a report in 1990. The report stated that with the Soviet collapse, Islam would spread widely in many countries. The report was written by CIA Regional Chief Graham Fuller and said that radical Islam would not come to power in countries like Türkiye. Instead, cooperation should be established with moderate Muslims. The US had found the enemy it was looking for. Until the 90s, the US used the right against the left. After the 90s, it would use moderate Islam against radical Islam. The best candidate for moderate Islam was Fethullah Gülen.
Fethullah Gülen, I want to thank you for your contributions to America.
During our recent time in America, we met various people. After some discussion from Abramowitz here, to some Middle East experts there, to various people including Eichelman, everyone. There were even people close to the White House.
CIA Regional Chief Graham Fuller, who wrote the Moderate Islam Report, and former US Ambassador to Ankara Morton Abramowitz vouched for Gülen. Thus, Fethullah Gülen's activities were deemed beneficial to the US, and in 2008 he was granted permanent residence in the US. So what made Fethullah Gülen beneficial to the US? Looking at the headlines and news of the period was enough to find the answer. Fethullah Gülen was able to establish close relationships with politicians from every party in every period. But none could say no to this man backed by the US.
You will create lobbies, you will pressure government ranks, you will reach prime ministers, you will meet with ministers, you will pressure politicians.
A person who carried out the September 12th coup. This is an evil, but it may also have good qualities. Mr. Bülant, may his resting place be in heaven, I say. If we understand the meaning of words, I say may his resting place be in heaven.
At that time, there was only one politician who could not get along with Fethullah Gülen. Necmettin Erbakan's Welfare Party increased its votes and won the municipalities of Istanbul and Ankara. The following year, he formed a coalition government with the True Path Party. As US reports predicted, after the 90s there was increased interest in an Islamic movement. Of course, the Gladio organization did not remain idle. It arranged assassinations of well-known secular figures to fuel Muslim-secular conflict. At the same time, students wearing hijabs could not enter universities, and those who graduated top of their class were forcibly removed from graduation ceremonies simply for wearing hijabs.
Although I was the top of my class, I was not allowed to attend the ceremony.
Shut your mouth!
Get off me! Let me go!
Shut up! You have no right to speak.
Come on, Circle. Not in front of everyone.
promised.
You are not French soldiers!
The rise of Muslims in society caused discomfort in the military and bureaucracy. Erbakan had reduced interest payments and begun to improve relations with regional countries. In other words, before Erbakan grew strong enough, he was challenging the US and the West. His rule did not last long. Zionist think tanks like JINSA and the Washington Institute wrote reports on how to deal with Erbakan. Their reports said Erbakan threatened US interests, that the military warned him to remain loyal to the US and Israel, and that the US should stay away from Erbakan. The secular military first moved tanks in Sinjar as a coup warning, then pressured Erbakan to sign National Security Council decisions. Among these decisions were provisions to maintain the hijab ban and block Imam Hatip schools. When Erbakan resisted signing, he was forced to resign. It was a time when the military and media owners formed and toppled governments. The Chief of Staff General Chevik Bir, head of the coup, was awarded the International Leadership Award 2 years later. The award was given by JINSA, the Zionist think tank, whose Alan Makovsky wrote the Erbakan reports. Fethullah Gulen applauded this America-friendly coup enthusiastically. 1 year earlier, the Susurluk accident had revealed the relationship between the state and Gladio. The old Gladio was giving way to the new Gladio, namely FETO.
In such a period, until the moment you find your true self, until the moment you reach the strength to carry the world on your shoulders, until the moment you have the means to represent that power, until the moment you gather all the power and force in all constitutional institutions according to the state structure in Turkey on your side, every step is considered early. Amid so many people, I have shared this feeling and thought in what I called a confidential manner, but I relied on your respect for confidentiality and on your sensitive feelings about privacy to tell this. I know that just as you throw empty juice boxes into a trash bin when leaving, you will also discard these thoughts into the trash bin under the aspect of being open.
When these secret conversations were leaked in 1999, Gulen had already fled to the US with the help of Prime Minister Ecevit. Exactly 1 month before Fethullah Gulen went to the US, PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan was captured and handed over to Turkey. Even then, Prime Minister Ecevit said, "I still don't know why the Americans handed APO over to us." Actually, the reason was clear. CIA Chief Graham Fuller, who wrote the Moderate Islam Report and vouched for Fethullah Gulen, together with Middle East expert Henry Barkey, wrote another report in 1998. The report was titled Turkey's Kurdish Issue. The report stated that Turkey could not solve the PKK problem with armed struggle and that political and cultural rights should be given to Kurds in the region instead. Of course, Americans were not concerned about the Kurdish issue because they cared about the Kurds.
In some matters, they say there is a joint Middle East project with Israel and so on. Yes, maybe we met with them, with the rabbi there. The 500th Century Foundation's chairman was once Pinto. We met with him. Indeed, they spoke of plans to divide 20 states in the Middle East and neighboring regions. I presented this to my friends as soon as I arrived. Some are curious about us too. I wonder, he came to me too. Where does he stand on this issue? If our interests are also involved in some way, we participate in this matter by engaging with others and sharing responsibility on an equal footing.
In other words, the US planned to divide the Middle East for its own interests. To intervene in the region, it would use radical Islam or Islamic terrorism as an excuse. That is why it needed moderate Muslim leaders in the region with whom it could establish relations. Erbakan was a Muslim leader, but he was not open to relations with the West. As soon as he came to power, he challenged the US and the West.
Sir, America wouldn't like that. I don't care about America. I don't care about America. Is America going to govern us?
When he tried to pursue an independent policy before getting strong enough, he was overthrown by a coup within just 1 year. After the Welfare Party was closed, Erbakan's students founded the AK Party under Tayyip Erdoğan's leadership and came to power in the 2002 elections. The AK Party defined itself not as Islamist but as conservative democratic. Unlike Erbakan, Erdoğan sought to establish good relations with the US and the West. Erdoğan was talking about joining the European Union, the economy was improving as Western capital was attracted, and credit rating agencies were raising Turkey's credit rating one by one. Western media was saying that Turkey was writing a success story. The positive atmosphere in the country reversed with the 2007 presidential elections. AK Party's presidential candidate was Abdullah Gül, but the fact that his wife wore a hijab disturbed secular circles. The General Staff, in a memorandum published on its website, stated that the president must be genuinely committed to secularism, not just nominally. Despite 50 years passing, the military could not give up intervening in politics. Fethullah Gülen and his organization took advantage of this anti-Muslim atmosphere and raised the issue that some generals were preparing a coup. Thus, FETO members who had infiltrated the judiciary and police since the 1970s initiated the Ergenekon case.
In this respect, the presence of our friends in the judiciary, civil administration, or any other vital institution should not be considered or evaluated as mere individual presences. These are our guarantee in those units for the future.
The organization began detaining many people, especially retired generals, whom it saw as obstacles. During the Ergenekon process, a closure case was filed against the AK Party for allegedly acting against secularism, and it was reported that Ergenekon members planned to end the AKP and Gülen. So both secular figures and FETO forced the AK Party to participate in the process, but events in 2009 would force Erdoğan to challenge the United States.
The Kurdish issue is not the problem of a part of this nation, but the problem of all. It is also my problem.
In 2009, the AK Party launched the peace process to solve the Kurdish issue. Interestingly, the policies applied in the peace process were included in a report written for the US government 2 years earlier. The report, written by American Kurdish expert David Phillips, called for the PKK to disarm, for the Kurdish political party to be the interlocutor instead of the PKK, and for support of the Barzani administration in northern Iraq. After the peace process began, PKK members who laid down their arms were met with celebratory dances after crossing the Habur border gate, which caused a great reaction, and the peace process was suspended. However, the government continued the process not as the US wanted, but as it deemed appropriate. The US wanted the Barzani administration in northern Iraq, not the PKK, to be the interlocutor in the region. The National Intelligence Organization opposed this and held Oslo talks with the PKK in the background. But the pro-FETO Taraf newspaper leaked the Oslo talks in 2011. The organization interfered in the Kurdish issue, which did not concern it, because the Kurdish issue was the US's issue. Shortly after, FETO prosecutors summoned MIT Undersecretary Hakan Fidan, who was managing the process, for questioning, but Erdoğan had strictly instructed Hakan Fidan not to appear. Hakan Fidan was then accused by FETO-controlled media of being an Iranian agent, because in 2010, the US imposed sanctions on Iran and banned all countries from transferring money to Iran. However, Turkey did not comply with the US embargo due to its independent policy and circumvented it through Halkbank. The warning came from Americans who vouched for Fethullah Gülen. CIA Chief Graham Fuller said, "Turkey should not become more Islamic. I would prefer to see more leftist movements in Turkey," while former Ankara ambassador Morton Abramovich made a prediction in 2012. Abramovich wrote that the political tension in Turkey targeted Erdoğan and that the AK Party could split by early 2014. What the former ambassador predicted came true. Daesh carried out one of Turkey's bloodiest attacks in May 2013. 2 weeks later, the Gezi Park protests began. Initially, peaceful demonstrations turned into an uprising as FETO-affiliated police and the PKK got involved. After the Gezi events, FETO mobilized and launched the December 17th to 25th operations. The operation directly targeted the mechanism that bypassed the US-Iran embargo. The government launched the peace process regarding the Kurdish issue in 2013. The state's ceasefire with the PKK was criticized. But the peace process was a national project, as Erdoğan said. To understand it, a broader perspective on the process was necessary, because after the Arab Spring, a civil war had started in Syria. Former Ambassador Abramovich also mentioned a Kurdish Spring against Turkey in his 2012 article. At the same time, the PYD, the Syrian extension of the PKK, posed a threat at Turkey's border. As if that were not enough, the Daesh terrorist organization, derived from Al-Qaeda, emerged.
Let us recall this. We financed the people we are fighting today 20 years ago.
Look, Daesh started with funding from our friends and allies.
Daesh, established with US support, directly attacked Kobani on the Turkey border because the PYD was in Kobani. When Daesh attacked Kobani, the US had an excuse to arm the PYD in the region. Although Turkey evacuated civilians from Kobani, the HDP called the people to revolt, and 46 people lost their lives in the ensuing events. The world was watching Turkey, the streets in the region were in chaos, and while the threats of PYD and Daesh loomed at the border, the peace process was buying time for Turkey. The peace process ended in July 2015 with the martyrdom of 2 police officers. Just 2 months later, the US announced that it did not consider the YPG, the military wing of the PYD, a terrorist organization. The US's institutional recognition of the PYD damaged relations with Turkey. A week later, Russia entered Syria at Bashar Assad's invitation and began bombing the Turkmens and opposition groups supported by Turkey. When a Russian plane violated the border, it was shot down by Turkish jets. Relations with Russia nearly broke off. While Turkey's relations with the US were strained, shooting down a Russian plane raised suspicions of sabotage. Later, Bylock Communications revealed that FETO members were involved in the downing of the Russian plane. While Turkey was balancing between the US and Russia in the region, this move by FETO left Turkey isolated. During this period, operations against FETO members accelerated, and Turkey began improving relations with Russia in June 2016. When the possibility of cleansing FETO members from the military arose on July 11, 2016, the organization acted on the evening of July 15th.
I may be the lowest and the most worthless of people, but in a way I aspire to something of quality.
Do not go so far. Do not wander within the vital arteries. And if one is to return, the matter of returning without injury or without being felt is a very important principle for our future. It is essential to comply with it.
You will create lobbies. You will pressure government levels. You will reach the prime ministers. You will meet with ministers. You will pressure politicians.
Traitors who have secretly infiltrated the state and military for 50 years attempted to invade Turkey on July 15th following orders from their handlers. However, this great nation shielded its homeland and stopped this treacherous invasion attempt.
On the day of July 15th, we were informed by the device that a coup was imminent. The declaration came from the highest command, Murat Karayılan. In this memo, the emphasis was more on ending the attacks targeting soldiers. Then, after the day of the coup, on the morning of July 16th, they learned the coup was ineffective, that it had been repelled. The next note said to do the exact opposite of what was previously ordered.
Had the coup succeeded, the PKK would have executed orders to plunge Turkey into chaos. However, just 40 days after the coup attempt, the Turkish army began operations in Syria, clearing our borders of terrorist organizations within a few years and effectively demonstrating its strength. The dangers facing Turkey today have not ended and will not end, because the same forces have been inside the state since Turkey was founded. Despite dozens of reports revealing this, politicians either could not resist this power or attempted to do so without sufficient strength and lost their rule. In other words, you had to be strong enough to fight this power.
For a long time, you were Erdoğan's ally, you fought against the secular military, you formed an alliance. Why did you grow apart?
Firstly, it cannot be said that I had a very close relationship with him. Once in my life, when I was a mayor, I believe he visited me, and I visited him as well. Whether he offered tea or not, I do not know. When he came to meet, while going down in the elevator already then, he said to the friend beside him, "We need to get rid of these people first."
Erdoğan had learned from the politicians before him. He understood that challenging this power, which had infiltrated all levels of the state for 60 years, would not be easy, and as FETO admitted, he waited to become powerful. As a result, in order for Turkey to fight these forces, it had to gain political independence first. To gain political independence, the traitors inside the state had to be revealed. For the traitors inside the state to be exposed, military and bureaucratic tutelage had to be eliminated, and tutelage could only be removed by the will of the people. Military coups that usurped the people's will and destabilized the country are now behind us. The persecutions experienced by people whose freedoms were taken solely because of their beliefs are now behind us. Today, there is a Turkish army busy with fighting terrorism, not interfering in politics. Today, there is a Turkey that has regained its political independence lost for years. Our real struggle for a fully independent Turkey begins now. That is, to bring Turkey to economic independence.